What's going on, guys? Sero here, and in this video I'll be showing you guys the best settings to improve performance and visuals in Valorant. I have compiled the best list of settings from pro players and from my own experience. I'll be going over Valorant settings, Nvidia settings, Windows settings, and Nvidia Filter settings. These settings will aim to increase FPS, lower latency, and increase visibility of enemies without completely destroying the quality. With that being said, let's start with Valorant settings. The first major setting that you should focus on is enemy color. The most important thing when deciding on what color you want to choose is the contrast. If you don't want to think about it too much, I suggest setting it to just yellow. There's not really much difference between deuteranope and protanope. Yellow should be a good balance of contrast. However, on Icebox, red is actually slightly better. This is because as Icebox is mostly white, red can stand out more than yellow. I'll talk more about contrast of colors when I explain Crosshair settings. For now, I recommend setting this to yellow and switching to red when playing Icebox. Sensitivity is personal preference. However, if you're rather inconsistent with your aim, then I recommend lowering it a little bit. I play 0.35 and 800 DPI, and I'm really comfortable with it. Scope multiplier is rather important. I highly recommend setting this to 1. In Valorant, when you're opping, you generally want to stay scoped in the whole time, and having this really low multiplier can make it hard to turn around. Setting it to 1 will make it the same speed as your non-ADS sensitivity. So for the map settings, it's really personal preference. However, I suggest setting the minimap size to 1.2 and minimap zoom to 0.8. This should give you the most possible vision and to make the map as large as possible without decreasing your visibility. So the rest of the settings here aren't too important. However, you should note that there is first person handed, which side. You could have left or right. I prefer right side, but left also works. And for show corpses, this you should generally want to turn it off, especially if you're playing Sage, because it's easier to tell where your teammates have died. For network buffering, you want to put this at minimum, and the rest of these don't really matter too much. For controls, the important thing is that if you like b-hopping really easily, you could have jump. The second option for jump, you could have mouse wheel down. So every time you scroll down, it should be really easy to b-hop whatever you want. And the other important thing is that you set your abilities, ability 1 and 2, to side mouse buttons. It should make it really easy to use both abilities whenever you want without letting go of WASD. So like jet dashing, race satchels, if you play aggressive characters and you always want to be in control of WASD, definitely set these to your side mouse buttons. So for the crosshair color is very important, maybe even more so than the actual crosshair. If you're using yellow enemy outlines, I recommend aqua dot size 2. This is because blue crosshair will contrast well with a light yellow enemy. For red enemy outlines, I recommend using a green dot size 2. This is because green and red are actually opposites on the color wheel. This means that a light green crosshair will be very easily visible on a dark red enemy. I highly recommend using 1 outline opacity. As you can see, if I set this anything lower, it really makes the crosshair a lot harder to see, and it's not as defined. And if I make this max, this will be very easy to see on the enemy. So across a light background, you always kind of want to have a outline. For the crosshair size, here I have it as 3, so it's easier to see in the video. But generally, I like playing at around 2 or 1. So the crosshair is very small. And this is because if you're taking really long-range Vandal duels, it'll be very easy to see and hit your opponents as opposed to a really big crosshair where you're not exactly sure where exactly you're shooting. So dot works for me, but you could actually play around with the crosshair itself. It doesn't really matter too much as long as it's relatively small and has good contrast with the enemies in the background. So for the video settings over here in Valorant, I just recommend turning all of these off and just put on limit FPS always. And just set this to 3 lower than your max monitor refresh rate. So my monitor refresh rate is actually 240 Hz. So for me, I'd put this at 237. If your max is 60, then just put this at 57 and so on. For Nvidia Reflex Low Latency, if you actually have this option, I recommend putting this either on or on plus boost. It should lower your latency and that should help you win more fights. So for the video settings, I would recommend putting on multi-thread rendering to on if you have a relatively good CPU. And the rest of the settings, you should just put these on the lowest possible to get the most amount of FPS. And I just have anisotropic filtering at 4x, so the skins load in and they look a little bit better. So for the graphic settings, there is one major thing I recommend doing, and that is going to your search and typing in graphic settings. And there's 2 really important things here. The first is hardware accelerated GPU scheduling. And here it says reduce latency and improve performance. You'll need to restart your PC to have your changes take effect. So for this, I recommend really turning this on if you have the option, obviously. This should reduce your latency and improve performance, which is both things that you really want. It might lower your quality a tiny bit, but you shouldn't really notice it. And over here, right below it, there is a section for graphic performance preference. You could browse an app and select Valorant. And once you select Valorant, you could go to Riot Games, Valorant Live, Shooter Game, Binaries, Win64, Valorant, Win64 Shipping.exe. And then once you select it, go to Options. And then there's going to be different options here, and select High Performance and then press Save. So these are the two things I really recommend turning on for the Windows settings that really made a difference for me. Moving on to the Nvidia control panel, if you right click on your desktop, there's a thing that will pop up, Nvidia control panel. You want to left click on it. So here at the top of 3D settings, you just want to make sure that this middle option is checked. Use my advanced 3D image settings, so that when you change your 3D settings, it will actually be applied to all applications. So then you want to go over to manage 3D settings, and there's a couple important things here. The first thing that you want to make sure that you have on is low latency mode. And you could put this on ultra or on, and I really recommend turning this on just on. Ultra could lower your FPS and cause some stutters, so you don't really want that. So on should just be a good balance. Then for modern technology, you want to make sure that it's on fixed refresh. Next, you want to go down to power management mode, and you want to hover on this, and you should be able to select perform maximum performance. Next, you want to go down to texture filtering quality. Press on it, and there's going to be different options. Choose the one that says high performance. Lastly, you want to turn off vertical sync, and this is because VSync will actually cause a lot of latency that you really don't want. So then you want to go down to adjust desktop color settings, and from here you could change your brightness, contrast, gamma, digital vibrance, and hue. And the important setting here is digital vibrance, and a lot of people play on 50, a lot of people play on 100, in between. And I tried like basically all of them, and I generally like going around 60, because 60% does make it more vibrant, but also isn't too hard on the eyes, so you could play for a long amount of time without getting tired. So after you chose all your desired settings, just hit apply, and then you could just close out of Nvidia control panel. So going back into Valorant, there's a setting that you want to turn on, which is Nvidia Filter, and you can get this by pressing Alt F3. And once you turn this on, this should pop up. For you, it should look more like this, where there's like nothing there. And as I switch between these filters, you could see the default game versus the style I have chosen. So for my filter, you want to go down to add a filter, and you want to go down until you see brightness and contrast. It should be one of the first things. So once you add brightness and contrast, you want to choose exposure to around 4%, contrast to around 35, highlights to max, shadows to the lowest, and gamma a little bit less than middle. Next, you want to add filter and add the color one. So from here, you want to make sure tint color is at 0%, tint intensity is at 0%, temperature is in the middle, and vibrance is around 50. You could play around with this obviously, but this is just for me the most optimal, and it looks the best in my opinion. And then the last thing you want to add is sharpen. And for sharpen, you just want to put sharpen at around 20% and ignore film grain at 15%. This should make your game a lot brighter and a lot more vibrant. You should be able to see enemies a lot easier, and it should make everything a lot clearer. So let me show you how it looks like compared to no Nvidia filter. So without the Nvidia filter, the game looks a lot more dull, and it's a lot harder to actually see things. There's a lot less contrast, a lot less vibrant, and it's just, with the filter, it's just a lot better. It's a lot easier to see people. This is the end of my best settings for Valorant video. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you're having any issues, make sure to comment them down below. If you're liking the content, then make sure to subscribe and like. I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.